Hello. So glad you joined us again today. I'm Dr. Brenda Murphy, and I'm an educational psychologist with Sail Away Learning and Academy. We've been talking about a very personal subject, the fact that my husband and I both had COVID, and this is our story. At the end of our last session that we're calling Stranger in My Body, because that's the way I felt, we were departing with Russ in a ambulance headed to our local, fairly rural medical center hospital, where, kind of giving you the end before the beginning, he would stay for about 3 weeks. And for 2.5 of those weeks, he was in the ICU, very sick. And that night, after I saw those red lights fading and the sirens going out of my hearing distance, there's kind of a relief. And all of a sudden, I realized that I needed to focus on myself. And so went to sleep that night and didn't wake up when I normally would in the morning. And I got up and realized I didn't have to focus on my husband's care. And I realized that I really was pretty sick, that I really didn't feel well, that I still had a low-grade fever, which I had had since the first day that my symptoms had begun. I realized that my mind was still kind of foggy, and this stranger in my body still was there, unexpected and unwanted. And the thing that was bothering me the most was a couple of days before, when I had gone outside to turn on some water to water the lawn. I realized that my chest was very tight and that I had trouble, a shortness of breath coming up the stairs when I finished. And so, although I had been in communication with my primary care doctors, I felt that it was time for me to go and find out really where I stood medically. Interestingly, although I had had my test for COVID almost 2 weeks prior, I had not received any test results. So as far as I was concerned, I was still undiagnosed without a positive or a negative test result. And as I said, my brother, who lives in the house, never showed positive. He had a negative test result and still has remained, and I'm very thankful for that. So I called my doctor and I went in, and they did a quick test, and not unexpectedly, it was positive. And they sent me for a chest x-ray because the medical care personnel knew that they heard something in my lungs. It turned out that it was pneumonia, the pneumonia that's been triggered by COVID. We got some antibiotics, immediately started with that, upped my dosage of vitamin C and zinc, also got a nebulizer with Pulmicort to help with my breathing, and also instructed to do some exercises for my lungs. Interestingly, one of my sons had encouraged me to blow up balloons, which is a really good lung exercise, whether you have COVID or not, but even to keep your lungs healthy is to blow up balloons. So having a party is a good thing. So after I received this diagnosis, I went home, and I knew that my staff at Sail Away knew that I had COVID, and I sent them a letter with what was going on, advising them that Russ had gone to the hospital the night before and that I really had still pretty sick. And so they wrote back and they said, well, what do you want? And there was only one thing that I wanted, and that was vegetables. It's funny, I had a hunger for vegetables. I suppose my eating and my diet had not been very healthy, especially in the past week, because we didn't feel much like eating. And quite honestly, I didn't have the strength and the stamina to fix the food that we needed. So my husband was in the hospital, And in communication with the healthcare professionals there, he was getting the very best treatment possible. He was getting the convalescent plasma. He was getting Remdesivir, which has been shown to help a lot, massive doses of C, massive doses of zinc, massive doses of steroids for his lung. He was on a considerable amount of oxygen, which mirrored the seriousness of his case. Thankfully, he was never put on a ventilator, and I attribute there to the prayers of our dear friends. So what we did was that next day, friends from all over who found out that we had been diagnosed and that Russ was in the hospital brought incredible food to nourish me and nurture me and to show their love in ways that I could not have ever imagined. So at that point, I realized that I really needed to rest. That was one thing that I had not done, even though there were times when being sick, I had no choice but to stop and to take a nap. But I would take a nap, sometimes setting the alarm for a short nap and then getting up and still going. So what I needed was more concerted, thoughtful rest. So I unscheduled a lot of Zoom and personal phone calls that I had. I did a lot of other things to carve out that time, and this was really difficult for me to do. So what I did at that point was I set the time aside, and because I'm one of those people who can't not do something, I did a few things that I had put aside for a long time, which was organize some pictures on my computer, take some pictures off an old computer and put them on a hard drive. I actually had time to delete several thousand emails. So if you try to send me an email and I don't respond, it's because it probably has gotten lost in that forest of emails that needed working on. And so I spent some time doing that. And I also spent time in prayer and reflection of giving thanks and glory to God that He had spared our lives. During that time, it was wonderful to hear my husband's voice sounding so much better than he had, because the last times I had seen him, I couldn't keep him awake, and he was confused, and he was back to his old humorous self. When I talked to the nurses at the hospital, they were saying that, yeah, they had discovered that he had such a rare sense of humor. And several days after he was been there, his only complaint was because he has some medical issues, the diet that they had him on, he was just really tired of the same cardboard breakfast. So I encouraged them to give him things off his diet, and he became a happy man after that. And thankfully, each day, his oxygen requirement was diminished slowly over time. And during that time, I also spent just reflecting. And finally, after over 2.5 weeks, I went to have a vitamin infusion, which several people had suggested to boost my immune system and to rid my body of the remaining remnants of COVID. And so a friend and I went and had a vitamin infusion, which I think helped to boost my system and give me a boost back to more on the road to recovery. And she and I actually went out to eat. And it was the first time I'd been out in almost a month. The next week was kind of a banner because it was time for my yearly checkup. It just happened to be that way. And my doctor was really pleased that despite going through this very stressful time of COVID, that my blood looked really good. She was actually surprised. Very little on it was out of whack, and I continued and I celebrated that day of having met that milestone where the symptoms seemed to be diminishing, that my lung x-ray, the x-ray of my lung was improved, not better, but improved. And so I really felt like I was on my way to recovery. And the next day I did some work on our cursive writing, Sail Away cursive writing program that we're getting ready to launch in the very, very near future. And I was full of energy. But by the end of the day, I started feeling sort of the symptoms of what I've come to call over the last years, many years, couple of decades that I've lived in Tennessee, what I call the Tennessee crud, which is a really bad headache and nasal congestion, not dripping, not sneezing or anything like that, but just a pounding congestion in my head. And quite frankly, that was more debilitating than COVID had been. And so rather than feeling more revived, I spent the next several days actually more out of it than I had prior to that. I can promise you that that was very discouraging, because I felt like I was on my way to recovery. And that same week, as I was feeling so much worse, Russ was feeling so much better. And actually, his need for oxygen had decreased to a place that he was being transferred to a rehab center, getting stronger, to get stronger physically in order to come home. And I was not feeling very well and not wanting to have that responsibility again. So over the weekend, I rested. And on that Monday, as part of the training that we had through the works, there is an incredible woman named Booth, who talked about how, especially we women who work and have positions of responsibility, have to learn to take care of ourselves first, to avoid burnout and to avoid health issues. And I've been so grateful, because I've been very strong physically and very healthy, and not to be healthy was very alien to me. And so I really thought about, it's important to take care of yourself, Brenda. That has to be a priority. And for someone who goes from 5:30 or 6 in the morning till 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and sometimes working and being very active during that time, the thought of having to scale back and take it easy was really not very pleasant for me. During this time, especially that same day, some of my children called and said, "Mom, we're really worried about you. Have you really taken this seriously? Are you really resting so that you can be fully restored to full health?" And I can be very honest that, yes, physically I couldn't do a lot of what I was used to doing, but their words and their powerful thoughts about that made me stop and think about, where was I and where was I going, and the responsibility that I feel from all of the information that I've been so blessed to have learned over all these years with the gift of Sail Away, that is such an amazing and different and freeing approach to teaching language arts and literacy, to all that I learned in my doctoral studies that showed different and more engaging ways for us as educators to interact with our students and therefore bring forth a real joy in learning. If I didn't start by taking care of myself, how was I ever going to be able to take full advantage and share with all of you the incredible experiences and knowledge that I've been so blessed to be given and to be have had access to and to have learned? So we will continue this story of how this stranger in my body has caused me to think in new and different ways. And we will conclude that in our next session of Strong at Home, Stranger in My Body. And I leave you with these words: the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his face, his countenance upon you, and give you peace. Peace to you until we meet again.